Good afternoon. My name is Wong, Danny Wong. I'm the Honorary Secretary of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Aesthetic Society. We are very happy this afternoon to have with us Dr. Adil Johan, who is going to speak to us a rather different topic. It's not very historical like the ones that we usually have. This one will talk a bit more on contemporary issue, something that happened in the 1990s. I don't know if you have any recollection of this. Rocking the State. Search. This is Search means a pop group, youth culture, and Malaysia's long hair band in the 1990s. I don't know about you, but I do recall the nightmare of my principal walking around with a Caesar in the 80s, and I suppose it went all the way into the 90s when the government started banning long hair again. But then in schools, some of these discipline masters or principal would have carried it a bit too far, I suppose. But that was what it was at that time. And I thought Dr. Adil's topic is right spot on for us to consider what happened those days and then to reflect upon this. Now, Dr. Adil is now Deputy Executive Director for the Asia Europe Institute in University Malaya. And he is also at the same time a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Creative Arts, University Malaya. So his work mainly on music and popular culture. Also, he looked into interculturalism, cosmopolitanism, intimacy, affect, and gender, and quite a lot. But the area is actually on Malay world and also Southeast Asia. Now he has published considerably, quite a lot, among others, Cosmopolitan Intimacies, Malay Films, Music of the Independence Era. This was published by NUS Press, and then co-editor of a book, Made in Nusantara, Studies in Popular Music by Rutledge in 2021. Now, Dr. Johan, just in case you don't know, is also a saxophone player. Was it saxophone?
That's
or
right. Yeah.
the saxophone player. He plays for the orchestra.
No.
No. Okay. Wow. He's an accomplished saxophonist. So I think I will not dwell more on this, but if you want to know more about Dr. Adil, maybe you can go to our expert to look him up. So without further much ado, I will pass the time over to Dr. Adil Johan, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Danny Wong. I think you may want to see my face. Oh, yeah. Oh, hello everyone. Sorry, this is my background. Will you be camera camera here or?
There is a camera there,
Okay.
so you can see the one on BMD1. You are there.
Oh, right,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
big one.
yeah.
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry, the light's a bit strange, so I'll turn off my own camera. Yes, thank you. Good evening, Professor Danny Wong. Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you very much to MBRAS for having me, giving me this wonderful opportunity to share my more recent research. And yeah, I feel like it's an honor for me to do this. Of course, this research may not be considered historical in the traditional sense, but for somebody that works in more contemporary and topical issues like popular culture, it's as historical as it gets. Although I do definitely draw a lot of inspiration from the historical methods used by many of the members and authors who are involved in MBRAS as well. We're very much inspired by that history of Malaysia, the Malay world, Singapore and Brunei, of course, the history of colonialism as well and the problems therein. But I would like to share something about the Malaysian state in the 1990s. In contemporary parlance now in the 2020s, we can think about the administration of the Barisan National Government and UMNO, that was led by UMNO as a very, almost like a nostalgic point of reference, almost if you think about it. There's been so many changes in Malaysia's democracy, and we've come quite a ways, and we've also not come, there are places where we progress, and there are areas that maybe some people feel have not progressed, although I would probably disagree. I think we've definitely come a long way, definitely since Reformasi, which is shortly after the period that I talked about in 1998. Nevertheless, we are going to explore an area, a period whereby UMNO reigned supreme in Malaysia, and Tun Mahathir's Vision 2020 was the talk of the town, so to speak, of Malaysia. But I am viewing this from the lens of what some people would call the subaltern or the margins of culture, that is rock, youth culture. Although in retrospect now, this culture of rock music from Malay youth has actually become quite dominant. In fact, it's become one of the main genres of music that can be associated with Malay culture actually now. And it's quite ubiquitous as well, even though that it had its heyday in the 80s and 90s. Just moving on. This is a little bit of an outline of what I will try to get through today. A little bit of an overview of the rock group search and Malay youth culture in the 1980s and 1990s. And then I overview this idea of the threat and power of Malay kutu rock culture. I'll explain for those of you who don't speak Malay, although I think most of you do in MBRAS. I will elaborate on that later. And just a play of words on hair entanglements. And for those who may remember the former and late Arwah Mohamed Rahmat, Information Minister of Malaysia at the time, and he was very much at the forefront of the long hair ban, which I will talk about. And then, of course, we can proceed to concluding thoughts and some discussion if we have time for that. And also, this is the presentation today is actually extracted from an article that was published in Indonesia and the Malay World in 2023, just the year that I joined UM. And it's called Crossing Borders and Crossing the Line, Nusantara Mobilities of Search and the Malay Rock Phenomenon of the 1980s and 1990s. So what I'm very excited to present today is actually the second half of this article, which talks specifically about the rock group's controversial period in 1992, where they were facing a long hair ban on Malaysian broadcast media. So that's just extracting that incident in particular. And in fact, this is the first time that I've had the wonderful opportunity to present it in a public platform. So thank you very much also, Prof. Danny, again, and to MBRAS for having me. So we'll start with a little bit of an overview on the rock group search. Unfortunately, I'm not going to play any music because I think we want to focus on the text and the reportage that I'll be sharing. But for those of you who don't know, there was a very famous band called Search. And if you search for Search online, just type in Search Malaysia, because I think it's too much of the word would be a bit too open for your search. So search online for Search Malaysia band, and you'll get to listen to their music. But they were also very much at the center of Malay youth culture and media in the 1980s and 1990s in Malaysia, in Singapore, Brunei, and Indonesia as well. They were also a cross-cultural phenomenon, as I will explain briefly. Just to give you a sense of what Malay rock culture looked like in the period, I think maybe Prof, maybe I can find you there, Prof. Denny, somewhere when your long hair days, when you escape your principal. But I don't know. I mean, it's when you think about it, right? I mean, think about how old are you, Prof, in the 90s? 30. See, so this is your generation, but maybe you were into other types of cultural things in Sabah, right? Yeah, so probably not in this, but you would encounter, and of course, this is a very Malay dominant as well culture, and of course, this borrows from rock culture that was global. So some people call it glam rock, short for glamour. Some people can think of certain icons in rock, such as Eddie Van Halen, who, even if you weren't really into rock, you probably would have had to hear the songs. There were bands that Malaysians really liked. There was a band from Germany called the Scorpions that was very famous. Winds of Change, Bon Jovi. Also, you remember Bon Jovi? So I mean, this is quite ubiquitous stuff musically, actually, because also of the conditions of the global popular music industry and its ability to disseminate such media, across a wide population. This is also a period of booming globalization through media, and music was one of the products along from TV and media that was spreading. And I mean, I talk about this now because a lot of my students are Generation Z, as you will, if you will. So for them to think also about music disseminated through physical products such as vinyl records and sets and CDs is also a foreign concept, because now everything is streamed. But at the same time, there was broadcast media, there was TV, there was MTV. So this was a popular form of disseminating Western popular culture in the East, or in outside of the West. And of course, there was adoption through globalization. There was much adaptation and adoption of such culture by local groups and local communities. So I would fashion the Malay rock community as one that's very much of that. But because you have such um, localized sites for interaction and for creating and producing art and music and interactions, you also create kind of local versions of this. And of course, linguistically, the music sounds exactly or similarly to the music from the West and other bands, but of course, the lyrics would be sung in Malay. And there was a huge industry an ecosystem of music production and creation. There were many songwriters that also popped up. Some of them came from other areas and fields as well. In a way, when I talk to fans of Malay rock now, they also tell me that Malay rock was also a platform for the development of Malay literature in a way through the lyrics of the songs. While the songs may sound, rockish and not necessarily sophisticated, there was a lot of sophistication and development in the language that was being used. And of course, a lot of these songs were actually sentimental. A lot of the popular ones were. Interestingly as well, I'm actually taking these images from compact disc reissues of these compilations that circulated in 1986. As you can see, this is a CD reissue that was done in 2017 of a compilation album of a band competition, and you can see all these bands. And this was originally released in 1986. But of course, what's very visceral about this is that you can see Malay youth uh, dressed in ways that you would not normally see them dress in current day Malaysia, right? You can see women who are not wearing the hijab and wearing quite relatively revealing clothing, as was with the times and fashion of the time. And men, you can see a singer there with long curly locks and very tight jeans. So that visceral kind of experience, I wanted to share that to give you a sense of the times. But also, you can probably already intuit that there were definitely contestations that would happen with Malaysia's more conservative society and the state, right? So this is Search. So this is actually a reissue of I would say, their most influential album, Phenomena. It was not only a huge success in Malaysia, but it was a breakthrough hit in Indonesia, which is also a very important point about my study on the rock band Search. And it contains one of the band's most iconic songs titled Isabella. Okay. Isabella was so famous and so famous in Indonesia that it was made into a film of the same name in Indonesia in 1990. And so there was this very interesting kind of cross-cultural or cross national exchange that was happening via popular music and via the phenomenon of Search as a rock band. And in fact, the Malay rock that was produced and made in Malaysia was was distinct to Malaysia at the time, that Indonesians saw it as this very interesting trend, and a lot of their youth were drawn to it, and it became a huge popular culture phenomenon in Indonesia. If you walk the streets of Jakarta singing the song Isabella, there are chances that you will have people singing along with you as well today. So this is something perhaps that Malaysia can be proud of, as well, in terms of a very solid foreign cultural export in Indonesia. And just a little snapshot of the lyrics. Isabella is a love story of two worlds. Why did we meet only to be separated? The day is lost, engulfed by the darkness of night. Worlds torn apart ends this tale. And this song is set in a ballad, a rock ballad style. In my article, I do talk about the idea of the power ballad, which has been explored in Western music, and how Isabella is an example of that. And a lot of the songs that you would have liked from Bon Jovi and Scorpions, like Winds of Change, for example. But this ballad, while it's a love ballad, it also interestingly talks. Is almost allegorical to the separation between Indonesia and Malaysia. So there's some very interesting intercultural and national border issues that you can see in this song. I'm not going to talk so much about this today, as it forms another part of the research. But in sum, I just wanted to highlight, in terms of their music, that Search uses global heavy metal. I didn't mention that earlier. And it relates to its audiences through a mix of heavy rock sounds, but also sentimental power ballads that is found in a lot of Western rock music. Next, in my research on the music specifically, we can see intimacies or connections that connect the Nusantara youth. And here I talk about how Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, the Malay-speaking world can also be seen as a Nusantara kind of formulation through the language and through their popular culture, and also through the history as well. I talk about mobility across Indonesia and Malaysia, and how such music represents a kind of fluidity and porous crossing of borders, and that Search represents a kind of boundary crossing through music between Malaysia and Indonesia. Okay, now moving on specifically to the focus of today, I want to focus more on Malaysia and the culture that was developing at the time related to rock culture, Malay Kutu rock culture. So these are some quotes. Heavy metal is a subculture that is a negative attempt to change Malay norms and values. We worry about kutus. They have taken on traits that are bad. Young men wearing earrings, clothes that are dirty, unruly hair. Such behavior leaves an indelible impression, and we are worried that when these young people get older, they will not be in a position to be responsible and run the country. And this was quoted from Najib Razak when he was a very prominent. He was a youth minister at the time. And there was an article written in a famous journal, Far Eastern Economic Review. It was published in 1989 about the phenomenon of this thing called Kutu culture. So Kutu, just as a reminder, means head lice. So that's a Malay word for head lice. So already there's this association, this derogatory association with such youth and their hair and their bodies as something that's undesirable. And also there's this equation with punk culture as well, although musically they didn't really do punk. It was more closer to heavy metal. And you can see the framing of the article. Punk rockers emerged as the flip side of the Islamic revival. And so we also have to understand contextually and remember contextually that the late 80s was also a time when the Dakwah Islamic movement was also on the rise. Our current Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, was also a prominent youth leader leading such a movement. So while you have this rise of a modernist Islam, a modernist yet also orthodox Islam, challenging the UMNO hegemony at the time, you also have this subculture of youth, of Kutu youth, or unsavory youth, listening to rock music, wearing tight jeans, and sporting very long hair. Okay. So just to unpack that a little bit, the music of Search and their counterparts, and there were many bands, as I've shown earlier, aside from Search, for me, they represent a kind of cross Nusantara movement. So this wasn't obviously just happening in Malaysia, it was also affecting Indonesia. And the film Isabella also talks about this issue where the Amy Searcher's love interest in the film, her father is actually an Indonesian diplomat, but who's very conservative and will not see her with any rockers, anyone who plays rock. But it's also something about, there's a story here about the working class here as well. So we also have to consider these class differences as well and how youth are associated with that. Um, and there's a sense of a challenge, although not a structured one, right? Like we would find in a Marxist revolution, but there is a kind of informal challenge to the ethno-national state at the time. And this is what I will talk about today. So this was ultimately a form of defiance, defiance through culture, defiance through the music, and defiance through how the youth express themselves in their bodies by way of their hair, and how this would then be the issue of contestation between, actually a major national issue of contestation between them and the Malaysian state in the 1990s. And also, yeah, I mentioned earlier the semiotics of the symbolism of the term kutu headline. So here, hair is very much a focus of this study, and all the different puns and terms and symbolisms that we can take out of it as well. Okay, now on to the meat of today's presentation. We get straight into the entanglements that happen, and I'm extracting some text from my study. This study was conducted using sources, newspaper clippings that were compiled by the Star Information Center. It's a wonderful place to also do some alternative research and more contemporary history. And they actually have these wonderful folders of different issues in Malaysian history and also people. And I'm sure maybe Prof, you've done this before, yeah. So if I was like a child in a candy shop there, and I got a lot of amazing articles on this specific issue, not just on search, but it was a specific national issue that was compiled. And they have, the amazing thing about their collection is that they have newspapers from they have other newspapers there as well, because it's a resource for their journalists to write, right, and to review. So I'm basically just going through a chronology of reportage. It's not everything, but to give you a snapshot of the issue that I'm covering here in this research. So on the reportage from 24th April 1992 reports that Mohamed Rahmat, the then information minister, who was also oversaw the Radio Television Malaysia broadcast network, so that was the television as well as radio of Malaysia that was nationally controlled. They would no longer broadcast radio songs by male artists that had long hair, falling below their shoulders, effective on 2nd June 1992. And I have there I will have for you also the newspaper reportage that I draw from, the newspaper articles. And then in 29 April 1992, the lead singer of the rock band Search, Amy, so you'll hear that name a lot, he defended rock singers with long hair that are not bad people, as perceived by certain quarters of society. And he emphasized that the government should focus instead on the illness of music piracy that was rampant in the country. So you can see this kind of interesting media back and forth that's happening between an information minister of Malaysia and a rock artist. You know, in Malaysia, this perhaps is, well, it's definitely not the first time, but you can see that this is kind of open discourse. We have this kind of view of Malaysia in the 1990s and 80s, ruled by Mahathir and UMNO, as being where the media space is very much politically controlled, right? There's a lot of censorship. But it was so interesting to find how that reportage, like such defiant, statements against the state were actually in the press. They were reported in the press. And it's probably that push and pull between the press wanting to sell, their newspapers as well by featuring a controversial issue. And there was this very interesting exchange, right, between the rock bands, Search in particular, the most popular one at the time, with Mohamed Rahmat and his national policies. Okay, and this was extracted from an article which reported on Search actually having a concert in Indonesia. So that also points to their popularity beyond our shores. Here's a little play on words. This was actually published in The Star. Hair Razor. It's an article that actually announces the long hair ban. that would be imposed, and some reportage also on Search finding alternative means to promote their album that they were about to release. Now we fast forward a little bit to May, like just a month later. Now the manager of Search then starts making press statements on how the band was not opposing the mainstream of Malaysia. They were actually trying to show how in their work ethic and commitments to quality and productivity were in line with Mahathir Mohamad, the then Prime Minister of Malaysia's Vision 2020 of being a progressive society, whereby the band had already found commercial opportunities in Indonesia, United States, and eventually they would move on to Japan. The Japan venture was nominal, but and so was the US. But what is obviously interesting here is that the band is also trying to very politically leverage on Mahathir's Vision 2020 rhetoric by showing that, look, we're a band, we're making money, we're working very hard, we're releasing albums, we're working overseas. Isn't this what you want for Vision 2020? Whereas of course the state narrative is that no, you have long hair and you shouldn't be representing our country. Okay, so there is this exchange that continues. Later on, then there's an event held in Merdeka, not sorry for the spelling mistake there, and the band actually performed. Imagine Dataran Merdeka to a 20,000 strong audience, and the audience was reported to have shouted that no, Search should not cut your hair, okay, because Search asked the crowd, oh, next month we might need to cut our hair. Do we need to cut our hair? And then the audience said, no, it's not rock to have short hair. In Malay, tak usah potong rambut. Yeah. Okay, so you have also this kind of, and perhaps, I don't have much evidence, but perhaps this was an event that raised alarm bells for Mohamed Rahmat and the ruling government, right? Imagine 20,000 youth, mostly Malay youth, loudly stating a kind of sense of defiance to a government ruling. And also reportage of that. Peminat menjerit mahu kumpulan Search bertegas. Okay. So this is a snapshot of that article as well. They're performing there. Usah potong rambut. Now on 14 May 1992, there was a directive to all radio stations and radio DJs to ban all airplay of songs by Search and the other popular rock band Wings. Okay, so you start to see more progressive banning already. And of course, by 12 June, there would have been a full ban on rock bands on Malaysian broadcast media, but they were still active with live concerts, which was basically their bread and butter as well, to promote their albums, but they also make money from this. But now we progress from media to physical bans of concerts. Okay, and there was Rampage. Rampage is actually the name of the album that they were about to release. Okay. And there was a ban of a concert to be held in Kajang, Selangor. I was just talking to Dr. Helen Ting, who's from Kajang, and told her that actually we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And the reason why Kajang is significant is because it falls under the jurisdiction of the Selangor state. And the chief minister actually at the time, I wonder if you remember Prof. Danny, who was the chief minister at the time, but I will reveal later. There you go. See? Okay, wonderful. So in response to the concert ban, he emphasized that the restrictions were not to deprive the artists, but to maintain social harmony in the country. So yes, you can already start to see the discourse with rock that's being associated with an unruliness that is upsetting the stability of the nation state. Okay. And so that's the article. You get to see the sad faces of Search, okay, being denied their concert in Kajang. And here's a quote from Muhammad Taib, okay, very famous Malaysian politician who was the Selangor chief minister at the time. He was apparently also a fan of Search and their song Isabella, but he wanted the rock artist to exemplify an identity of success. And he elaborated that rock artists should introduce a disciplined culture that is orderly and in line with the background of this nation's society. We do not want the youth to follow their rock style of dress to the point that it conceals this nation's true social identity. We do not allow Muslims to drink alcohol and gamble, but concerts are attended by all Malaysians, including youth, who might adopt a culture that has never been a part of Malay people prior to this. Broadcasting images of long-haired male artists will influence youth, especially in interior areas, to copy that style. And I think you've seen many different versions of such rhetoric at different periods of history in the Malay world, in the UK, in the US, right? It's all part of that same rhetoric of controlling youth. Okay. So here are some themes that I could extract from that chronology, at least leading up to the Kajang concert ban. We have themes of discipline, the disciplining of youth at least, versus the fluidity and freedom of rock and youth culture. We also have this kind of instrumentalization of Islamic morality. In other excerpts from the newspaper clippings, they do talk about, you know, this relating Malay youth culture to Islam, and that rock culture obviously is at odds with that. And of course, you can see here that the state, or at least the ruling government, is at the heart of contesting the hearts and minds of Malay youth, whereby they're seeing that they're losing that appeal to rock bands, right? Rock bands definitely are captive of such youth. And of course, in somewhat summary conclusion, rock is threatening to state influence and control of Malay vote banks. I mean, this is my direct kind of reading, but I mean, when you have politicians making very overt statements, I think that's quite obvious, right? I think they don't want the youth to be influenced. Okay. And there's of course a lot of literature in political science that also speak to this that I cite in my article. How about international relations? Right. Now, in another front page news report, Mohamed Rahmat cautioned that statements by Search. So Search, remember that Search was also popular across the Malay-speaking region, and they were doing radio interview promotional work in Singapore as well, Singapore Broadcast Corporation. And they were in an they were reported to have said something demeaning to Malaysia in this interview. And Mohamed Rahmat responded to that by saying the long hair issue must be taken seriously because it is closely related to AIDS and drugs. The government is now working to shape a strong cultural image for Malaysia to make it a developed nation. And I think those of you who are working on Malaysia, on history on Malaysia in the 1980s, 90s, like that's the theme, right? Vision 2020, progressive nation, developing nation. What's the word that we used to use? World-class nation. Okay. And of course, dignity, right? In this case. So that's the reportage from that. And of course, I indicated earlier, just a reminder that Search was very influential across borders. Like they were very influential in Indonesia. But of course, the more conservative sectors of society would have seen them as, these are the unruly rock band from Malaysia. And it would also obviously be associated with Malaysia as bringing this kind of unruly rock culture as well across their borders. Further themes, of course, you have this idea of contesting the international image of Malaysia. Popular culture is an uncontrollable cross-border phenomenon, and the power of Malay rock culture actually threatens Malaysia's Vision 2020 again. But also now what you're going to see is a movement from defiance to compliance. So we now end with the incident of the national cutting of the hair of the rock artists. 1st November 1992 on Malaysia's show, I think I also grew up watching the show, Selamat Pagi Malaysia. They broadcast, the RTM, Radio Television Malaysia, broadcast the symbolic cutting of the two rock stars' hair. So they took the two lead singers from the band Search, Amy and Wings, Awi, okay, and Mohamed Rahmat actually cut their hair on national television. It was just a symbolic cutting. It was just like one lock of hair that he cut. And then the band, and this was kind of like the permission for the bands to then continue to be broadcast on television. And then they proceeded to perform. Okay, and that's a press conference where Mohamed Rahmat is showing how he will cut Amy's hair at the broadcast. Okay, there you go. November. And actually, I'm almost done. I'm done, Prof. And so now, yeah, just some concluding thoughts and discussion. So I'll just read a little bit from my abstract. Now, I've drawn from newspaper archives and media discourse, and I have what I would like to argue is that the policing of rockers' bodies reveals deeper anxieties about youth culture, masculinity, and national identity expressed by the nation states or their state actors. Malay rock's affective power, especially through their sentimental ballads, resonated widely with working class youth, becoming a site of both resistance and regulation. So interestingly, the songs that were really popular were actually the sentimental ones. But of course, there were heavier, more defiant ones as well. But the sentimental songs made them popular beyond like just a fixed demographic of society. Now, the case that I presented in allows us to consider how popular music can mobilize affect. So I guess this is taking it a bit further and challenge moral political boundaries, even under a like a alleged authoritarian regime. Ultimately, it demonstrates how cultural expression can become both a threat and a tool for negotiations of state power in Malaysia in the 1980s and 1990s. And with that, I think I'm happy to have discussion or questions from the floor. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Adil, for this a wonderful talk. And I think I think he raised a lot of interesting ideas. I think there will be many questions. Perhaps I will just open to the floor. You can just introduce yourself briefly and then put forward your questions or comments. Please, if you like, maybe you can share.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. So if anyone would like to raise some questions, William, you need to use.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for the presentation today. Sorry, there's a bit of feedback here. Okay, I think it's safer here. So my question is one that's related to, well, I guess the culture of music in general, because early on you talked about the materiality of back in the past where you had to go out, buy a CD and that kind of thing. And I know there's a bit of a turn back to the material now. When you go to a concert, you'll also pick up like the merch from the bands themselves and that sort of thing. And I think it's something that local bands are also doing. So it's not just like, big K-pop groups and that sort of thing. Would you be able to comment on maybe moving forward to the present? Would you have any comments on, that sort of material return that we see today? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that wonderful question. I will have to respond in terms of capital first. There is an economics behind that return to merch and to materiality. That's the pragmatic side of it, is that it is very difficult to make money with recorded music because of streaming platforms now. When artists get plays on streaming platforms, they only get a small fraction of that in terms of royalties. So nowadays, artists increasingly have to create other forms of merchandise to generate revenue. And also even the most famous artists like your Taylor Swifts and Bruno Mars, they have to their main income actually comes from live concerts. So not just the materiality, but actually the performance and live performances, and it's a huge money making business. And you may have noted that Singapore offers a tax exempt haven for international concerts as well, international artists, because it is a multi-billion-dollar industry as well. So yeah, the money is not in recording. So the answer to that is that that's where we're going, because streaming is so accessible and so affordable now, but it's not being distributed. It doesn't distribute revenue to artists the same way that it did before. Whereas in the new history that I provided here, you can see that the bands were very much dependent aside from concerts, on selling their physical albums, and radio was a means to promote that, to promote such sales. But as you can see, I hinted at it as well, there was also the scourge of piracy that was occurring. And Malaysia is a piracy haven as well in the 80s and 90s and beyond. But now the internet pirates everything in a way, but it also aggregates everything. Was that okay? Thank you.
So I'm Brian. I'm an ancient rocker.
Excellent.
And but thank you, Dr. Adil. I think that's a fascinating insight in terms of yeah, at one level rock music, but at another level a deep insight to society. One thought and one question. At one level, it seems to have played out in a very almost positive Malay way. When I think back to the experience of the Rolling Stones in my country, and as you say, every country has their own equivalent of this. But the mechanisms, I mean, the British state and a big segment of society felt the same way about rock music in the early 1960s. I mean, the Beatles were lovely and cuddly, but the Stones were threatening, both in terms of their lyrics and their lifestyle and drugs. But there were the mechanisms of social control didn't exist for the British state in the same way. So the action that was taken was to actually try to criminalize their activity. And Keith Richards and Mick Jagger were jailed for drug possession, and I think they were quite brutally gone after to achieve that. And I think that was very salutary to them as well, because there's one way to end your career, and that's being locked in jail. And it's interesting now that Mick Jagger is a knight of the realm, and how things change. But there are some parallels. But at one level, it seems to have played out in a almost a humorous way. The public cutting of the hair, the recognition that the business model needed to get back on track. People enjoyed the music, almost a negotiated deal, cut the hair, and it's there. But at another level, it seems like a humiliation to have your hair cut by your father, the government. And I wondered, what's your sense of what the deeper dynamic was of how people felt about it? And the secondly, how did record sales go? I mean, did people sort of still love the music, or did they feel that as the band had sold out, abandoned the ethics, given in, that they'd move on to other groups that continued to fly the flag for youth culture? Sorry, a lot of questions there, but hopefully it's useful.
Thank you so much, Brian, for the kind barrage of questions and also context, international context. And yeah, you've given me a lot to work with here and to share. Definitely, there is definitely a public humiliation. It's interesting how the semiotics of that played out and how Search was humiliating the government, right, in the press. But it is definitely an act of humiliation. That is essentially it. It was an act of disciplining. So there's a lot of literature that I point to that talks about the discipline. The late Professor Zawawi Ibrahim, who was a Malay anthropologist of the Malay world, actually was also a songwriter and contributed to a lot of songs by Search and M. Nasir. And he wrote a very poignant article titled "The Disciplining of Rock," which I cite heavily in my article, "Disciplining of Rock." And he puts that in context of, and to answer your question, of that what happened after, right? So you have the rise of the Dakwah movement in the 1980s and 90s. Then you have the incidents where rock is finally disciplined and controlled. And perhaps this is one of many acts. But immediately after that, in the mid-90s, you start to see a rise, at least in the cultural spheres, of nasheed, of Islamic popular music. And there's a huge shift almost in Malaysian music popular culture towards nasheed music, because you have a group called Raihan that gains huge international fame. So there's, I think, what we witness, at least in the snapshot of the history, quote unquote, that I provided, was this kind of transitional period where you do have the state succeeding in suppressing dissent. And the political scientists here will probably be able to tell us more also about what was happening politically at the time. But yes, definitely, I think that to answer your question, that would be the deeper dynamic, is that, as you can see, that even though it's research on popular culture and music, the analysis is inherently political because it has to be. Um, but perhaps that is the perspective that I hope I can share with the political scientists and historians here, in terms of popular culture, and with more with more empirical evidence as well. Their record sales, yeah, I think they would have maintained a steady flow, but I think there was a general sentiment that they had definitely sold out. There was a lot of that in the press as well. There was a lot of talk about selling out and how Search had to be defiant to show that they were fighting. So perhaps it's also, I mean, rock bands who are making lots of money are in a way also political actors and act very much, as we can see from the media reportage, act very much like politicians. So that's another interesting angle that I could see. And they had to show that they were fighting the ban. But eventually the rice bowl, so to speak, periuk nasi, is going to be affected. So they have to kind of make a deal, negotiate, kind of like how Trump is dealing with tariffs now. So they had to make a deal and negotiate and concede, and comply. But yes, there was definitely a dip in popularity shortly after that, and a switch towards nasheed. But then, interestingly, also related to William's question, is that now there's this kind of ubiquity of the rock from that era. People, a lot of the youth of the time, of course, have grown up, and they have more buying power. So there is a lot of Malay rock right now. You can hear it sonically. Like if you were to eat at, let's say if you if to eat at a Malay restaurant or eatery, on the street, you will hear these sounds. You will hear these songs. So it's almost become a ubiquitous, it is a ubiquitous form of music right now that's been, of course, historically removed from this period of defiance. Almost become like norm. So basically, we call this in music the mainstreaming of such music. Of course, it was already mainstream, but now it's further mainstreamed. And yeah, thank you so much. But I hope that was all right. Yeah.
Thank you, Adil. There are two questions on screen. Perhaps you may want to take them.
So Kubundar asks, hello, hi. Given today's social political climate in Malaysia, where issues of artistic freedom, youth expression, and moral regulation are still contested, how do you see the legacy of the era influencing current debates over censorship, religious conservatism, and cultural control? Are we witnessing a continuation, a transformation, or a rebranding of moral policing today? I think it's like, this is a great question. I don't, I will have, I mean, I'm not in a position to make a broad analysis of this, because I don't have the data. But my humble view is that control has definitely changed due to the current context of the internet, obviously, social media. But you can see that the state is still very much finding ways to not to suppress, but it's almost like to monitor such work. But I think what's important about what we're trying to do, at least as historians, is to share with the youth that there are these cycles of contestation, negotiation, defiance, resistance that happens, right? So what do we make of that? I mean, I think while we're talking about immediacy and internet and ways to defy through the internet, but also ways to control with the web and with all these kind of technology, I think we need to remind people about these historical narratives that that have occurred over time. Continuation, transformation, or rebranding of moral policing today. Moral policing is always going to be there. I don't think, I mean, the rebranding is always there. Moral policing also can happen through personal, it doesn't have to just be through the state. Now you have non-state actors, you have trolls now, right, online that are policing people online. You have communities of people online that are having all kinds of contestations as well. The state is present, but of course the state isn't as dominant as it was before, which is why I thought it was interesting to show the history of how powerful a state can be. But it's like, on one hand, you have states that are disempowered, but you also have, at the same hand, at the same time, you also have artists who are also not as powerful as they are before. Because this, can you imagine a rock group having that kind of media time? And also now what we perceive of as media also has changed as well. You don't have a state-controlled TV broadcast or radio station that everyone has to listen to. Now you have the tyranny of choice. You can choose what you want to listen to and choose what you want to watch. But you also have algorithms also subtly controlling what you're watching. So it's complex, but thank you so much. There's a lot of points to reflect on. The next question was from Randy Ho, Shu Che. Hi, Dr. Adil, based on your experiences, I want to know whether there were different procedures on musicians' hairstyles from national official broadcasts like RTM and other broadcasts such as TV3. You know what, Randy, thank you so much for that question. I'm also like, as Prof. Danny shared, I'm also a professional performing musician. So I didn't explore the history of the 90s beyond that, but I can tell you that as someone that has performed on national television broadcasts in Malaysia, that yes, clothing rules are still enforced and very strict. They're probably not as strict on long hair anymore. I think you can still have long hair if you're a male, but they are strict about, of course, decency. And I think where we need to expand this study is to look at, of course, mine also looked at gender in terms of masculinity, but of course, you know, there is already a lot of work on women's the policing of women's bodies and their clothes and how they are told to dress. All you have to think about, aside from the historical stuff, in present day also, just taking a cue of the previous question, think about all the artists the international artists that have been banned from coming to Malaysia as well. Different procedures from, yeah, we have Liang Xin. Do you mind if I take the next question, Prof? So Liang Xin says, and I wonder if the band is concerned with the commercial band. They are somehow old school for me, not the underground bands, which may be more influential with the youth group and the counterculture. Will other underground bands view Search as a traitor or something like? Yes. The short answer is yes. So following in the mainstream, so we have to understand as Search, even though they're in the narrative I presented, they were defiant. I also have to remind everyone that they were very much a mainstream group. That means that they were bought by, I mean, when you think about the political demographics, majority of their fans were young Malay male. So just think about that in terms of voter demographics. That's a huge enough market to sustain yourself. So yes, they were a commercial band. And for the underground bands, the underground scene actually started to emerge during the late 90s. So definitely you have a completely different kind of scene with more like heavy metal. And these groups did not have that commercial appeal or accessibility to the media, to the mainstream media that bands like Search and Wings did. So it definitely created a counterculture. You're definitely on spot, Liang Xin. And I hope, yeah, I think you are a researcher as well. So thank you for that wonderful question. Ichiro Sugimoto says, thank you, you're very welcome. To what extent did state endorsement of artists like Sheila Majid and Zainal Abidin reflect the government efforts to construct a modern but disciplined Malay Muslim cultural identity? Thank you so much for that wonderful question, because it just so happens that the progression of my research from the rock band search is Sheila Majid and Zainal Abidin in the 90s. And I don't know if it's a state construction project per se. Okay, yes, you're right. You're also articulating that nuance, reflect the government efforts. Yes, I totally agree with you here, even though it's a question. But basically, yes, Sheila Majid and Zainal Abidin very much reflected um, the state effort to control the image of what Malaysian music, especially on the international, or what Malaysian popular culture and their artists should be on the international stage. So when you have artists like Sheila Majid, who are dubbed the jazz queen of Malaysia, who also became very popular in Japan in the 90s. She is the epitome of what Vision 2021. She's the epitome of the successful Malaysian Malay, modern Malay individual who is successful both at home and abroad. And the music, specifically the jazz, for example, the fusion jazz music that she played is also very much in line with this kind of commercial corporate appeal, which what Mahathir really wanted. So you have the twin towers, KL Tower, you have all the glitz and glam of capitalism in the late 90s, and the yuppie culture, so to speak, if you remember that. And Sheila Majid and Zainal Abidin were very much reflective of that. So thank you so much for enforcing that view. And yeah, I hope if you're interested in doing research on this, we can collaborate. I am doing research on this, and there is an article that I wrote as well about this that I can share. It's called Transnational Rhythms, I believe. Nanti I will share. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the two questions, all the questions. I wonder if there are any other comments or questions that you want to put forward to Dr. Adil?
Comments. I mean, number one, I think I thank you all for joining us today, and thank you again to Prof. Danny and the MBRAS team. I think I'm very excited and inspired by being able to present. I was sharing with Prof. Danny that when you have a lot of the university grant work that you have to do, sometimes you actually forget that you have actual research that you need to work on. So this was a wonderful opportunity to reignite that, and I'm very much inspired to explore these issues of I don't know if you call it new history. Let's just call it history, can I? History lah. We call it history. Where historical research is definitely my passion, and I actually have a lot more newspaper clippings of other artists such as Sheila Majid that I am working on currently. So I'm actually very much interested in the period of Vision 2020. I mean, like Ku Butik wrote the book on paradoxes of Mahatherism. So I actually was reading that also quite a bit when I was working on this article. So I'm quite fascinated with Malaysia in the 1990s and that period of Mahatherism in relation to popular music and popular culture, of course, because I think there was a direct link to the success and direction that these artists were taking as well in that period, to the kind of state ideology and ethos that was driving economic progress, if you will, or the economics of the state and the politics as well. And I think, yeah, this has been a great opportunity to think and reflect on that further. And I hope that I can submit something or share more with the new research, thanks to MBRAS and the wonderful opportunity today.
Thank you, Dr. Adil. I think the questions that were raised and also the topic that we have today is certainly timely because we are able to reflect on a particular period of time beyond the usual things that we do before 1941 or something like that. But more importantly is to be able to reflect on a particular period when Malaysia stood proud at that particular time with the Twin Towers, with new airport, new KLIA, everything new. And then we have our own style of musics and so on. But yet you also have other ways of expressions and so on that requires perhaps some relook. We want to acknowledge a lot of friends who came to join in the talk. Some friends who are coming from afar. Yang Xing is from China, who is based in China. Professor Ichiro Sugimoto is from Soka University. We also have Dr. Paul Hyung Hong from USM and many other friends. Thank you for coming to today's talk, MBRAS talk. We also hope that some of you may think that it is worthwhile to sign up as a member. It's not very expensive, but you get the benefit of journals, 2 issues of journals, and then and then all the talks and so on. So we hope you can join us as a member. We want to capture as many as possible. We hope to see our membership increase in a substantive manner. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Adil, for coming and spending time with us, and wishing all of you a very good weekend. Thank you so much. Goodbye.